Welcome. Today's lecture will be on endocrine gland and its hormones. So, beginning with what is an endocrine system? An endocrine system is the system of glands which generally controls the long term activities of the target organs as well as the physiological process such as digestion, metabolism, growth and reproduction. In contrast, more rapid activities are under the control of the nervous system. Endocrine organs are the effector organs that are under the control of the nervous system either directly or indirectly. Endocrine systems also include glands of the endocrine glands that are located in the different regions of the body of the animals. And the endocrine glands were the first to be recognized as the ductless gland because they have no external ducts and their discharge are directly poured into the bloodstream. Having acquired the understanding of what is an endocrine system, let us move on to the word hormone. The word hormone comes from the Greek root hormao, which means to excite. The activity on the endocrine system involves the release of special chemical substances called as hormones, which are usually carried by the circulating blood to the target organs which have the receptor to produce to the response. Hormones are special chemical substances which are elaborated in restricted area of animals and influence the activity of various organs of the body and thus bring about a harmonious working of the body. Hormones are sometimes called chemical messengers of the body and they are effective in minute quantities. Their regulatory actions are either of excitatory in nature or inhibitory in nature. Having learned about what is endocrine gland and its hormones, now let us go into the details of endocrine glands, starting with the pituitary gland. It is also known as the hypophysis and is perhaps the single most important endocrine gland in the body. The metabolism and function of most of the endocrine glands of the vertebrate are of almost somatic cells and are influenced by secretion. The pituitary gland is a small, unpaired, round body about the size of a large pea weighing approximately 5 grams in humans. Classically, the pituitary gland is considered as the master gland of the endocrine system because it secretes the hormones that regulates the endocrine gland. Example, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, adrenal gland and the gonads. But the pituitary gland itself is under the control of the hypothalamus. It is found at the base of brain, specifically the diencephalon, and is lodged in a depression of sphenoid bones of the skulls called sella turcica, just posterior to the optic chiasma. Thus, the pituitary gland is one of the best protected and inaccessible endocrine gland. It is composed of 3 lobes, the anterior lobe, the posterior lobe and the middle lobe. Embryologically, it has dual origin. The anterior lobe and the intermediate lobe arises from diverticulum of the roof of embryonic buccal cavity known as Rathke's pouch, while the posterior lobe arises from an outgrowth of embryonic brain, specifically the diencephalon. The anterior lobe and the intermediate lobe of the pituitary are known together as the adenohypophysis, while the posterior one is known as the neurohypophysis. The pituitary gland is divided into 2 zones. One is the anterior pituitary gland and the other is the posterior pituitary gland. The alternate name for the anterior pituitary gland is adenohypophysis or pars distalis. The adenohypophysis of the pituitary gland is characteristically glandular in nature and secretes different hormones. Growth hormone, a globulin protein with a molecular weight of 31,500 Daltons. This is made up of 188 amino acid and secreted by specialized acidophilic cells. The hormone stimulates the body growth through protein, fat and carbohydrate metabolism. Hyposecretion of this hormone causes dwarfism due to influence on the skeletal elements during the growing periods. The individual is of small stature, but well proportioned and without any mental deficiency. The puberty is delayed and associated with hypoglycemic attacks. Hyposecretion after the skeletal growth period causes the pituitary myxedema with symptoms like reduced BMR characters, puffiness of the skin, the body becomes swollen and heavy. Because the old age symptoms like graying and falling of hair, paleness, dryness of the skin, weakness of the muscle, loss of vision and wisdom are also noted. the genitalia becomes weak, causing sexual disability. Hypersecretion of this hormone during the period of skeletal growth causes gigantism, characterized by excessive growth of bones with the enlargement of internal organs as well. It is mainly evident in the bones of limbs, and individuals may grow up to a height of 7 to 8 feet. Hypersecretion in adulthood causes acromegaly. Here, the bones become abnormally thick due to ossification of peristonium and thickening of the soft tissues as well. These changes are most noticeable on the faces as well as at the margins and the hands and the feet. Moving on to the second hormone, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone or TSH. It is a glycoprotein of molecular weight of 10,000 Daltons, which is secreted by the special basophilic cells called the thyrotrophs of the anterior pituitary gland and contains about 201 amino acid residues. The function of the thyroid stimulating hormone is to promote growth and function of the thyroid gland. Moving on to the function of the thyroid stimulating hormone or the TSH. It increases the absorption of iodine in the cells and increases the secretion of the thyroid hormone. Its secretion is stimulated by the hypothalamic thyrotropin releasing factor, or also called as TRF. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. It is secreted by the corticotrophic cells of the anterior pituitary and its molecule contains 39 amino acids. Moving on to the function of ACTH or adrenocorticotropic hormone. Its role is to intensify the synthesis of adrenal cortical hormones. This is in fact stimulates the flow of blood to the adrenal cortex and increases the concentration of cholesterol and steroids within the glands and increases the output of steroid hormones, especially cortisol. Friends, having studied 3 hormones, we move on to the 4th one, which is called prolactin. It is also known as luteotrophic hormone or LTH. Its molecular weight is about 25,000 Daltons, and this protein is produced by the acidophilic cells, and its molecules are polypeptides of 198 amino acid monomers. Having studied about prolactin, let us move on to the functions of prolactin. This hormone stimulates lactation, which is milk production, and it has the direct effect on the breast immediately after parturition. Parturition is the event of giving birth to a newborn baby. The blood level of prolactin is lowered by the inhibiting factor called dopamine, which is produced in the brain. Having studied 4 hormones, we move on to the 5th category of the pituitary gland hormone, which is the follicle stimulating hormone, or also called as FSH. It is produced by the basophilic cell and it is a glycoprotein with galactose, mannose, galactosamine, sialic acid, uronic acid and many other carbohydrates made up of 204 amino acids. The FSH is produced both in males as well as in females. In females, its function is to carry out up to ovulation, whereas in males it is responsible for the development of the seminiferous tubules and maintenance of spermatogenesis. Friends, having studied 5 hormones, we move to the 6th category, which is known as ICSH or LH. The alternate name for ICSH is luteinizing hormone. It is also produced by the same basophilic cell as those for FSH, and it is also a glycoprotein with a molecular weight of 26,000 Daltons consisting of 204 amino acids. The hormone is called ICSH in males because it affects the interstitial cells or the Leydig cells of the testes to produce the androgen in males, and in females it is called LH and it induces ovulation in the ovaries. In the females, the LH acts upon the corpus luteum to stimulate the production of progesterone, also known as gestagens, and in males it is connected with the secretion of androgen. Moving on to the 7th category of the hormone produced by the pituitary gland is the melanocyte stimulating hormone or MSH. It is mainly secreted by the intermediate lobe of the pituitary gland, and MSH increases the skin pigmentation in the amphibian by stimulating the dispersion of melanin granules in the melanocyte. Its exact role in human is unknown, but the process of MSH receptors in the brain suggests its main influence in brain activity. However, continued administration of MSH for several days does produce the darkening of the skin. As I told you in the beginning that the pituitary gland is divided into the posterior pituitary gland and the anterior pituitary gland. Moving on to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, or also known as neurohypophysis. This lobe is developed from the diencephalon of the brain. It does not synthesize hormones, but it is stored and releases two hormones, and it consists of pituitary and axon terminals of the hypothalamic neurosecretory cells. The cell bodies of the neurosecretory cells are located in the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus. Different neurosecretory cells produce one of the two hormones. First is oxytocin and second is ADH, or also known as antidiuretic hormone. Its alternate name is vasopressin. Oxytocin. During and after the delivery of a baby, oxytocin affects two target tissues, the mother's uterus and the breast. During the delivery, oxytocin enhances the contraction of the smooth muscle cells in the wall of the uterus to facilitate the delivery and also stimulate milk ejection from the mammalian gland in response to the mechanical stimulus by suckling of the infant. And the second category is the antidiuretic hormone, or also known as vasopressin. The antidiuretic hormone is a hormone that decreases the urine production. ADH causes the kidneys to return more water to the blood and thus decreasing urine volume. And in the absence of ADH, urine output increases more than 10 folds, and one fold is 20 times, from 1 to 2 liters in a day to about 20 liters a day. There are several endocrine glands located in the visceral region of the body. These are the thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, pancreas and the adrenal gland, the thymus, the gonads as well as the pineal gland. Friends, having studied the pituitary gland, we move on to the second gland, which is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is situated in the neck in front of trachea and larynx at the level of 5th, 6th and 7th cervical and the first thoracic vertebrae. The gland consists of two lobes, one on the either side of the thyroid cartilage joined by a narrow isthmus on the ventral side of the trachea. The thyroid gland is composed of follicles and stromal tissues. The thyroid hormone is produced in mono, di, tri and tetraiodothyronine along with thyrocalcitonin in small quantities. Out of this, the tetraiodothyronine is called thyroxine. Thyroxine. The function of thyroxine is to carry out the production, oxygen uptake and maintenance of the basic metabolism rate, or also known as BMR. It increases the gluconeogenesis and hyperglycemic effect while decreasing the sugar tolerance. It also affects the normal growth and metamorphosis in youngs, as does the growth hormone, and it also affects the growth in general, while the TH alone affects tissue differentiation. It also increases the heart rate, and it is necessary for normal emotional responsiveness and cerebral activity. Moving on to the abnormal secretions of the thyroid hormone, which leads to a diseased state. The disorder may be due to insufficient functioning of the hypothalamus, the anterior pituitary or the thyroid gland itself, or due to insufficient intake of iodine in the diet. The main effect of this causes high metabolic rate or low metabolic rate. The first type is hyperthyroidism, or also known as thyrotoxicosis. This syndrome arises as the body tissue are exposed to excessive level of thyroxine. The main effect are due to increased metabolic rate. A temporary increase may be tolerated, but the sustained increase causes cardiac arrhythmia because the heart becomes overstressed as it tries to supply extra oxygen and nutrient to the hyperactive body cells. Second, it increases gluconeogenesis from the body proteins to provide extra energy, causing the loss of weight, muscle wasting and weakness. It also causes diminished glucose tolerance and glycosuria, and it causes physical restlessness, mental excitability due to neuron hyperactivity. The second class of disorder is the hypothyroidism. The insufficient secretion of the thyroid hormone causes cretinism in children and myxedema in adults. Cretinism. The child receives hormones from the mother before birth, so appears normal after the birth, but within a few weeks or months, as the hormone is used up, he becomes to retard physically and the mental development of the child also becomes evident. Moving on to the next, we have is myxedema. It is deficiency of the thyroid hormone occurring after normal mental and physical development is complete. It results in an abnormally low metabolic rate, lack of response to demand for energy, and the mental and the physical process becomes slower, and the heat production, also known as the calorigenic effect, becomes even much lower, and the person is not able to survive in colder environmental temperature. The important hormones of the thyroid gland is the T3 and the T4 along with the calcitonin. So, now let us study the function of calcitonin. This is secreted by the C cells in the thyroid gland. It acts on the bones and the kidneys to reduce the blood calcium level. It reduces the reabsorption of calcium from the bones and inhibits reabsorption of calcium by the renal tubules of the kidney. It is also antagonistic to the parathyroid hormone, which is secreted by the parathyroid gland. Moving on to the histology of thyroid glands. The thyroid gland is composed of many spherical hollow sacs called the thyroid follicle, and in this tissue section, each follicle A appears as an irregular circle of cells. The principal cell which surrounds the follicles are the simple cuboidal epithelium, and these follicles are filled with colloid, which is denoted by B, which is usually stained as pink. The principal cell uses the thyroglobulin and iodide stored in colloids to produce the primary thyroid hormone, including thyrotoxins. Between these follicles are the parafollicular cells called as C, which produce the hormone calcitonin. The parathyroid glands were first discovered in the Indian rhinoceros by Richard Owen in 1850. The glands were first discovered in humans by Sir Ivar Victor Sandstrom, a Swedish medical student, in 1880, and it was the last major organ to be recognized in humans so far. The parathyroid gland is present as 4 small patches, 2 each embedded in the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. The gland is developed as epithelial buds from the 3rd and the 4th pair of pharyngeal pouches, and the hormone secreted by it is the parathyroid hormone. It is a linear polypeptide with about 84 amino acids and a molecular weight of 9500 Daltons. Now, let us study the function of the parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid hormone acts directly on the bone to increase the bone resorption and mobilization of Ca2 plus ions. It is a hypercalcemic and a hyperphosphatemic hormone. The PTH increases the phosphate excretion in the urine, and this phosphatouric action is due to the decrease in the reabsorption of phosphates in the proximal tubules of the kidney. PTH also increases the reabsorption of Ca2 plus ions in the distal tubules of the kidney, and it is a major regulator of the levels of calcium, magnesium, phosphate ions in the blood. Having studied the function of the PTH, now let us move to the disorders associated with the parathyroid glands, beginning with number 1, the hyperparathyroidism. Excess secretion of parathyroid hormone usually is due to the benign tumors of the gland, which causes the reabsorption of calcium from the bone, thereby raising the blood calcium level. This effect may be due to the muscle weakness, general fatigue, metastatic calcification. The second disorder is hypoparathyroidism. Parathyroid hormone deficiency causes an abnormal low level of Ca2 plus in the blood, and this reduces the absorption of calcium from the small intestine and the reabsorption from the blood as well as to the glomerular filtrates. Low blood calcium level causes increased skeletal muscle tone and in several conditions causes tetany. There are very strong powerful spasms of the skeletal muscles. Development of cataract, paresthesia and convulsions. Histology of the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid cells are embedded in the thyroid tissue, and their tissues are often found within the thyroid cells. The chief cells that make up these glands are smaller and much more darkly stained than the thyroid cells, and these are the cells which secrete the parathyroid hormone. Pancreas. It is a composite gland which is having both exocrine as well as endocrine functions. The endocrine part of the pancreas consists of the islets of Langerhans, and the pancreas is about 15 centimeters long and 2.5 centimeters wide and weighs about 85 grams in. It lies close to the duodenum. The pancreas lies in the epigastrium and left hypochondrium areas of the abdomen. It is composed of 3 parts: the head, body and the tail. The head lies within the concavity of the duodenum, and the unicinate process emerges from the lower part of the head and lies deep to the superior mesenteric vessels. The neck is constricted part between the head and the body. The body lies behind the stomach, and the tail is left to the end of pancreas. The body and the neck of the pancreas drain into the splenic vein, and the head drains into the superior mesenteric and the portal veins. The lymph is drained into the splenic, celiac and supramesenteric lymph nodes. The endocrine gland of the pancreas consists of the islet of Langerhans, which was first discovered in the pancreas of the rabbit. It was discovered by P. Langerhans in the year of 1862. The two main types of cell in the islets of Langerhans are the alpha cells and the beta cells. The alpha cell secretes the hormone called as glucagon and the beta cell secretes the hormone called as insulin. In addition to the alpha cells and the beta cells present in the islets of Langerhans, there is also a third type of cell called as the delta cell, which secretes somatostatin, and the F cell secretes the pancreatic polypeptide. Moving on to the hormone insulin, which is secreted by the beta cells. Insulin is a peptide hormone. It plays a major role in the regulation of glucose homeostasis. Insulin acts mainly on hepatocyte and adipocyte and enhances cellular glucose uptake and its utilization. This leads to the rapid movement of glucose from the blood to the cells, thereby resulting in the decreased blood glucose levels and causing hypoglycemia. It also stimulates the conversion of glucose to glycogen in the target cells, and its main function of the insulin is to participate in homeostasis of blood glucose and promote the metabolic activity, which is also called as anabolism. It also increases the conversion of glucose to glycogen, thereby forming glycogenic chain in the liver and the skeletal muscles in an event called as glycogenesis. Moving on to the second category of hormone called as the glucagon. The glucagon is a peptide hormone that plays an important role in maintaining the normal blood glucose level. It acts mainly on the liver cells and stimulates an event called as glycogenolysis that results in the breakdown of the glycogen and increasing the blood sugar level called as hyperglycemia. Glucagon reduces the cellular glucose uptake and its utilization, and its main function is to stimulate the conversion of glycogenic chains to glucose in the liver as well as the skeletal muscles. Thus, the glucose homeostasis in the blood is maintained jointly by insulin and glucagon in the following manner. The glucagon increases the blood glucose levels and the insulin reduces the blood glucose levels. Histology of pancreas. The dark staining cells of pancreas are exocrine and are arranged in acini. These are the sacs-like glands with ducts. These cells produces the enzymes for the digestive system, and at all magnification, lighter staining patches of the cells, which are the pancreatic islets or the islets of Langerhans, are denoted by A. While the three types of cells that make up the islets cannot be distinguished in the preparation, it is important to know that the alpha cell produces glucagon, the beta cell produces insulin. Moving on to the disorders related to the pancreatic hormones. The first is diabetes mellitus. This is due to the deficiency or the absence of insulin or interference of insulin activity that causes varying degree of carbohydrates and fat metabolism storage, excessive gluconeogenesis from protein catabolism, water and electrolyte imbalance. In diabetes, cells fail to metabolize glucose, thereby resulting in the weight loss. Next, we move on to the pineal gland. The pineal gland, also called as the pineal body or epiphysis cerebri or epiphysis or conarium or the third eye, is a small endocrine gland in the vertebrate brain. It produces derivatives of serotonin, melatonin, a hormone that affects the modulation of wake sleep patterns called as circadian cycle. Its shape resembles the tiny pine cone, and it is located near the center of the brain between the two hemispheres, and it is tucked in a groove where the two round thalamic bodies join. The pineal gland is a small endocrine gland attached to the base of the third ventricle of the brain at the midline. It is a part of the epithalamus positioned between the two superior colliculi and has a mass of 0.1 to 0.2 grams. Melatonin secreted by the pineal gland is an amine hormone derived from serotonin. More melatonin is released in darkness and less in strong sunlight. In darkness, norepinephrine released by the sympathetic fibers stimulates synthesis and secretion of melatonin, which may promote sleepiness. Melatonin is thought to contribute to setting the body's biological clock, or also called as the circadian rhythm. During sleep at night, the plasma level of melatonin increases tenfold and thus declines to a low level before awakening. Melatonin levels are higher in children and are reported to decline with age, but there is no evidence that the change in melatonin secretion correlates with the onset of puberty and sexual maturation. Moving on to the next endocrine gland, we have to study now the adrenal gland, also called as a suprarenal gland. These are a pair of glands that are situated on the upper poles of each kidney enclosed within the renal fascia. They are about 4 centimeters long and 3 centimeters in thickness. Internally, the gland is differentiated into the cortical and medullary tissues, and this gland was discovered by Eustachius, and the endocrine nature was suggested by W. B. Cannon. The adrenal gland are named for their location with respect to kidneys. The term adrenal comes from the word Latin which means near and renes means kidney. Similarly, suprarenal is derived from the word where supra means above and renes means kidney. The suprarenal glands can be divided into the two zones, the outer cortex and the inner medulla. The outer cortex is also called as the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex again has 3 zones that produces 3 groups of hormones synthesized from cholesterol, and they are collectively called as adrenocorticoids. These are mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids and androgen. Starting with mineralocorticoids or aldosterone. Aldosterone is the major mineralocorticoid secreted by the outer zone of the adrenal cortex, the zona glomerulosa. Its functions are associated with the maintenance of the electrolyte balance in the body. It stimulates reabsorption of sodium by the renal tubules. With the increase in the amount of sodium reabsorption, the amount of potassium excreted also increases, indirectly affecting water excretion, as water and electrolyte excretion are related. The amount of aldosterone produced is influenced by the sodium level in the blood. If there is fall in the sodium blood level, more aldosterone is secreted and more sodium is reabsorbed. Moving on to the second category, which is called as glucocorticoids. Cortisol or hydrocortisone and corticosterone are the main glucocorticoids synthesized by the middle zone of the adrenal cortex called as zona fasciculata. Glucocorticoids have widespread effect on the body system. The main functions include the regulation of carbohydrate metabolism, promotion and formation of storage of glycogen, gluconeogenesis, which is the formation of new glucose, and last is the promotion of sodium and water reabsorption from renal tubules. Moving on to the third and last category is the androgens, or also called as sex hormones. Sex hormones is produced by the zone called as zona reticulata or zona reticularis of the adrenal cortex and is believed to have little significance compared to those produced by the other glands, especially in females. They are associated with the deposition of proteins in the muscles and retention of nitrogens, especially in the males. Moving on to the second category, which is the adrenal medulla. The medulla is completely surrounded by the cortex, and that is why it is called as the inner medulla. It is an outgrowth of the tissue from the same source as the nervous system, and its functions are closely allied to those of the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system. It is stimulated by its extensive sympathetic nervous supply to produce adrenaline, also called as epinephrine, and norepinephrine, which is also called as noradrenaline, in the ratio of 1:4. These are commonly called as catecholamines. Adrenaline. Adrenaline is associated with the flight or fight after the initial sympathetic stimulation by constriction of the skin blood vessels, dilating of the blood vessels, converting of the glycogen to glucose, dilating of the pupils, and the last function is the dilating of the bronchioles, allowing an increase in an air uptake. Adrenaline and noradrenaline are released in response to stimulation by the sympathetic nervous system and by the stress factors. Moving on to the second one, which is the noradrenaline or norepinephrine. This is the postganglionic chemical transmission of the sympathetic nervous system. The main function of noradrenaline is the maintenance of the blood pressure by causing general vasoconstriction except of the coronary arteries. Moving on to the histology of adrenal gland. When observed at low magnification on the left, the capsule A, cortex B and medulla C are visible. At higher magnifications, the division of the cortex are visible. The zona glomerulosa within the cells in small cluster which secretes aldosterone, the zona fasciculata which secretes cortisol, and zona reticularis which secretes the androgen or the sex hormone. The medulla is the site of epinephrine and non-epinephrine production. Moving on to the next gland of the endocrine system, we move on to the thymus gland. The gland is endothermal in origin and embryonically developed from the epithelium of outer part of the third gill pouch or epithelium of the gill cleft. It is a lobular structure present on the dorsal side of the heart and the aorta. It attains maximum size during puberty, and after that its size decreases till the age of 70 and it becomes a very tiny structure. It is present in the upper part of the sternum and the pericardium which surrounds the heart. The thymus gland plays a very important role in the development of the immune system. It contains lymphoid tissue that takes part in proliferation and maturation of T lymphocytes. Three kinds of peptide hormones are released by this gland and are called as thymosin, thymopoietin and thymulin. Thymosin plays a chief role in the differentiation of T lymphocyte which produces cell mediated immunity. Thymosin also promotes the production of antibodies to provide humoral immunity. It is also believed to control the slow growth in childhood and accelerate cell division, lymphocyte formation, resistance to infection upon the attainment of sexual maturity. Thymus gland degenerates in aged people, thereby resulting in decreased production of thymosin and decreasing the immunity with age. The thymus continues to grow from birth to puberty and then begins to atrophy, as in decrease in size. Proportional to thymic size, the thymic activity is most active before puberty. Upon atrophy, the size and the activity are dramatically reduced and the organ is primarily replaced with fat. The atrophy is due to increased circulating levels of sex hormones. Chemical or physical castration of an adult results in thymus increasing in size and in activity. 70% of the patient with autoimmune disease such as myasthenia gravis commonly are found to have thymic hyperplasia or malignancy. The reason or order of these circumstances are yet to be determined by medical scientists. As you can see in the following table, you can see the chart between that of age and mass. At the birth time, the weight of the thymus gland is just about 15 grams, but however at puberty it is 35 grams. But at the age of 25 years it becomes 25 grams in weight, and as the age progresses at about 70 years the thymus becomes just 5 grams in weight. Gonads are the organs that produces the gametic cells like the oocyte in females and sperms in males. So, moving on to our first category, the female reproductive system or the female gonads. They produce several steroid hormones including the two important in functions. These are the estrogen, also known as estradiol 17 beta, and progesterone, also known as gestagens. These female sex hormones along with FSH and LH, which are produced in the anterior pituitary gland, regulate the menstrual cycle, maintain pregnancy and prepare the mammalian gland for lactation. They also help in establishing and maintaining feminine secondary sex characteristics such as enlarged breast and wide hips. The ovaries also produce protein hormone inhibin that inhibits the secretion of follicle stimulating hormone. During pregnancy, the ovaries and the placenta produce the peptide hormone called relaxin, which increases the flexibility of the pubic symphysis and helps dilate the uterine cervix during the labor and delivery. This action helps the ease of baby's passage throughout the birth canal and ultimately coming to the new world. Histology of ovary. A marks the primordial or primary follicles in both the micrographs, and B is a Graafian follicle with its oocyte. Estrogen and progesterone are produced by the follicles under the influence of FSH and LSH from the pituitary gland, which is also called as hypophysis. The germinal epithelium is not so easily seen in this magnification. The male gonads testes are oval glands that lie in the scrotum. The main hormone produced and secreted by the testis is testosterone, an androgen or male sex hormone. The testosterone regulates the production of sperms and stimulates the development and maintenance of masculine secondary characteristics such as beard growth and as well as the deepening of the voice. Moving on to the last part, which is the histology of testis. The testis is composed of highly coiled seminiferous tubules, and these are seen here in a perfect cross section. Spermatogenesis occurs in the seminiferous tubules, thereby resulting in the production of sperms. Between these tubules are the interstitial cells that produces the hormone called testosterone, and the pituitary hormone FSH and LH are essential for the proper functioning of this particular organ. Now friends, at the end of the chapter, let us quickly revise all the various endocrine glands which we went through. The hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, the thymus gland, the kidneys which had the suprarenal glands, the ovaries and the testes. I hope all of you understood the various aspects of what endocrinology is and how it deals in various human processes. Thank you.